Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories from gas station and rest stops. And if you'd like to support the channel financially and get a bunch of really cool perks for doing just that, feel free to follow the link over to Patreon. And if you do, you'll be able to listen to this week's exclusive cemetery stories. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I work in retail petroleum construction and maintenance, which basically means I spend a lot of time inside gas stations installing and upgrading fuel controllers, point of sale systems, that kind of thing. Most of it is routine work, but this one night still shakes me when I think about how close we came. We were scheduled to do an overnight upgrade at a BP location in a city we rarely work in. The neighborhood had a bad reputation with high crime and a lot of sketchy foot traffic, even during the day. BP insisted the job be done overnight to avoid disruptions during the day. Not unusual, but it did feel off. My coworker and I checked into a nearby motel that morning so we could sleep and be ready for the night shift. But instead of napping, we made the dumb decision to grab a few drinks at the hotel bar. One turned into two, and before we knew it, we passed out. We'd set our alarms, but they weren't loud enough to wake us from our drunken slumber. We woke up half-hour late, and were in total panic. We were supposed to be on site at 11 p.m., and by the time we scrambled out of the room, gathered our tools and drove to the site, it was already 11:45. We pulled up and immediately slammed the brakes. The entire gas station was taped off, blue and red lights flashing, police everywhere, EMTs in a body covered behind glass. We sat there stunned. The cop eventually approached our van. We told him we were contractors scheduled for an overnight upgrade. He gave us a long look and said, "You missed it by less than 30 minutes. Someone came in, robbed the place, and shot the cashier in the head. Didn't even ask for money. Just walked in and pulled the trigger." I remember feeling the blood drain from my face. If we had been on time, if we hadn't overslept by 30 damn minutes, we would have already been inside right behind the counter, next to the cashier. BP ended up hiring private security for us every night shift we did after that. No questions asked. We finished the job 2 nights later, and I can't explain the feeling of standing in that same store, behind that same counter, next to the blood-stained floor, knowing how close I came to being part of a crime scene. It's been years now, and I still think about it sometimes, how something so simple, oversleeping by half an hour, might have saved our lives. I used to work the night shift at a gas station. One night around 10 p.m. I was closing up, putting away stock and locking coolers, when this old lady walked in. Well, wobbled is more accurate. She looked frail and leaned heavily on this gnarled, rough-looking cane. Her clothes were dated, like something from a few decades back. She shuffled up to the counter and asked if we had something specific. I can't remember what it was now, maybe gum? Something really small and oddly specific. I told her I'd check and turned to look at the shelves behind me. And when I turned back, she was already at the door halfway out, moving a little too fast for how shaky she looked coming in. I finished my shift, kind of weirded out, but whatever. And as I was clocking out, I asked the manager if he'd seen that old woman come in or leave. He looked confused, said the cameras didn't show anyone coming in around that time. The next day, I was visiting my grandma. She was showing me in the obituaries in the paper. An old friend of hers had passed away. While I glanced over at the names and photos, one made my stomach drop. It was the woman from the night before. Same eyes, same hairstyle, even the same cane. She had died nearly 2 months earlier. I live in a major city. with a well-earned reputation for drug activity, gun violence, and a growing unhoused population. The shelters have mostly closed, and things have gotten more chaotic over time. I don't stereotype anyone for their housing status. In fact, I volunteer with a homeless outreach program. But after this night I quit, and can't bring myself to return. It was around 10 p.m., and I was on my way to my partner's parents' house, about a 30-minute drive out to the suburbs, when I realized I needed gas. I really didn't want to stop at a gas station near my apartment that late, but I knew I wouldn't make it otherwise. So I pulled in, a few blocks away. The area was rough, but the station was well lit and busy enough that I didn't feel immediately unsafe. I pumped my gas and ran inside for a snack. When I came out, a tall man in a dark coat and a brown beanie approached me. His age was hard to pin down, anywhere from mid-20s to late 40s, and he started rambling about being a music producer, working on some new big project. His tone was friendly, if a little erratic. I gave him a few polite minutes, told him I had to go, and turned to unlock my car. That's when he slid into the passenger seat. My stomach dropped. Every red flag in my body went off, but instead of screaming or running, I froze. His demeanor stayed casual, like we were old friends on a road trip. He said, "I need money. My son's in the hospital. Gunshot wound. His mum's waiting for me." It was clearly a lie, but I was afraid and I just wanted him gone. I handed him the little cash I had in my wallet and told him he needed to leave. He looked at it and then said, "Can you give me a ride to my friend's place? It's just up the road." Wait, I thought his kid was dying in hospital. I tried to politely decline and told him my boyfriend was waiting for me. That sent him on a tangent about my love life, asking gross personal questions and making disgusting comments about my body. I blocked out most of what he said, but it was vile, and I felt trapped in my own car. There weren't many people around. I didn't feel safe calling the police, so instead I agreed to drive him, figuring I could maybe get him out that way. He had me winding through side streets and sketchy neighborhoods, passing what looked like abandoned houses. Eventually he had me stop in a brightly lit parking lot of a beauty salon. He told me his friend worked there, and she'd give him a ride to the hospital. The guy was high out of his mind. The story kept changing, names, locations, even how his son supposedly got shot. He talked non-stop, treating me like I was his bestie, while still making weird, gross comments and saying he wished he could trade places with my boyfriend. I kept saying I needed to leave, but he kept insisting his friend would give me my money to pay me back for helping him. Then he asked if he could use my phone to call her. I hesitated, thinking it might be a setup to steal it. But I still thought he might be dangerous, so I handed it over without unlocking it myself. Huge mistake. He stared at the screen for a long time while I looked away, and then suddenly, he was watching indecent videos and had his hand in his pants in my car. I wish I were joking, but the image is burned into my brain forever, and I snapped. I yelled at him to get out my car and was done being polite. And then he started crying, or pretended to, it was hard to tell. Then he suddenly stops and smiles and said, "I'm just messing with you. I wouldn't cry like that. You sure you want me to take me to," insert completely different part of the city? "Yes, I'm sure." I told him my boyfriend was probably worried since I'd been gone for over an hour, and that finally got through to him. He opened the door and just walked off. I drove to my partner's house shaking. We had just started dating at the time, so I didn't want to seem dramatic, and I casually said something about dealing with a creepy guy. Months later, I told him the whole story, and he was horrified. But it didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, I started getting calls from random local numbers. One left a voicemail just breathing and a faint mumbling. I tried to brush it off until one day I picked up. "Hey, it's Mac. I have your money." I nearly vomited. I told him to keep it and leave me alone and hung up. He kept talking until the line went dead, and I blocked every weird number I could. Thankfully, eventually the call stopped. The only way he could have gotten my number was from my phone when I handed it to him to call his friend. He must have looked at the contact info on top and memorized it. As for why I never called the cops, my city is notorious for police brutality, especially in downtown. I've personally seen people beat over minor infractions, and I was afraid that calling the police would make everything worse for me and/or him. And yeah, part of me feared they'd shoot him and I'd have to live with that, but I regretted it since. A friend of mine encountered the same guy months later on the opposite end of the city. Same story about his son, same request for a ride. Thankfully, she screamed at him until he left. This happened last year just before Christmas. I was driving from Nashville, Tennessee to Kent Island to visit my parents. It's about a 12-hour haul, and I had my dog Kona with me. She's a pit bull, bulldog, husky, Labrador mix, and she looks like she could bench press me. I'm a tall, fairly built guy, not someone most people would mess with, or so I thought. It was around 10 p.m. when I hit Harrisonburg, Virginia. I was exhausted. Kona needed a bathroom break, and the gas gauge was hovering on empty. I pulled into a gas station that was still open, parked at the pump, and began filling up. I left Kona in the car while I ran inside to grab snacks and a much-needed Red Bull. When I came out, I noticed a man standing by my pump. He was tall and skinny, and had the appearance of someone who hadn't showered in weeks, and was wearing clothes not even close to being warm enough for the weather. As I approached, he called out that he was homeless and needed extra clothes, and it was freezing outside. I felt for him, but all I had in the car were wrapped gifts for my family and the clothes I packed for my trip, which weren't many. I apologized and told him I couldn't help. He glanced at the boxes in my back seat and insisted anything would help. I told him I didn't have extras, but offered him some food that I had just bought, which he declined. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and asked if he could have the coat off my back. It was a heavy, navy pea coat, something my mum had given me as a graduation gift, so I told him, "Sorry man, I need this coat," and his whole demeanor changed. He started yelling at me, that I was spoiled, probably lived off my parents, and other random crap. I was caught off guard, and before I could react, Kona jumped into the driver's seat, her head cocked and ears up. The guy stepped closer, suddenly grabbed my shoulder. I instinctively backed up, bumping into my side of the truck. Now he was less a foot away with one hand on my shoulder and the other buried in his coat pocket. He leaned in and said louder this time, "I need your help." And that's when Kona lost her mind. She started barking like crazy, full teeth, snarling, hackles up. She has never reacted like this before, but in that moment she knew I was in trouble. The guy's eyes darted towards her, and I saw a flicker of panic. I looked at him dead in the face and said, "Leave me alone now, or I open this door and my dog will rip your throat out." He backed away immediately. I yanked the door open, shoved Kona out the driver's seat, and got in as quickly as I could. But Kona was still losing it, barking and pacing in the backseat, ready to jump if I gave her the chance. I waited until he was just far enough away, put the gas pump back and peeled out of there. But as soon as I rounded the building, I looked over and saw him getting into the passenger seat of a black SUV parked on the side of the station. Not so homeless after all. Originally, I had planned to stop a bit later and get Kona a nice steak as a thank you. But 5 minutes down the road, she crapped all over the back of my truck. I think she was too scared, poor thing. But I've never been so grateful for her instincts. I grew up in a smaller town of around 6,000 people, and my family frequently went out at night to go on walks and such. We'd never seen people out and always felt safe, so it was never a thought in my mind that something bad would happen. My parents always lectured us about not talking to strangers and being safe at night, especially since I'm a rather short girl and was around 16 when this happened. We moved to a nearby town that's much larger a few years back, which had a bad reputation. One night, my mum's boyfriend had a bad stomachache, and my mum's car wasn't working, so she asked if I could go get some Tums from the nearby gas station, which wasn't even 5 minutes away. Of course I didn't mind, I knew he wasn't feeling great and it was around 10:30 and quite dark out. I pull into the gas station and go to park at the entrance, when I see a guy in a hoodie standing by the front doors, shielding his eyes from my lights. The thing is, my headlights aren't that bright at all, even when my brights are on, so I knew something was off right away. I got out and made sure to lock my door and hurried in. They didn't have any Tums or anything related to them, so I left quickly, hurrying back to my truck. I noticed the guy was gone, and there was now a car parked next to mine, even though no one had come inside. I get in, shut the door, and something in me told me to lock my door. They're manual locks, and I sit far forward so they're behind me. I had never thought to lock them before, when not a second later, the guy comes out from behind the other car and is trying to open my door and starts slamming his fist on my window and screaming at me to let him in. As you can imagine, I was terrified in that moment. I turned the truck on and sped the hell out of there, shaking like a leaf, and ended up getting the Tums at another nearby gas station instead. Scary to think what could have happened if I hadn't have had the feeling of locking my door. And I try to avoid going anywhere now alone at night. The following happened when I was 16 and driving cross-country with my mum and older sister. It was just us, 3 women alone on the road, making our way through the middle of nowhere on desolate stretches of the interstate. It was a clear night with the moon hanging low, but we were all wide awake. So anyway, we needed to hit up a gas station and have a bathroom break, and this stop appeared just in time. It was the only station we'd seen in over 200 miles. Old sign, flickering lights, and a few beat-up pumps, and a concrete building with a single light buzzing over the door. There were 2 other vehicles when we pulled up, a large van full of teenagers and a small grey sedan parked at the pump in front of us. 2 men stood outside the grey car. My mum and sister went inside and I stayed in the vehicle. I always liked a few minutes of silence on the road trip. It helped decompress. I watched the teenagers at the pump. They looked nervous. One of them said loud enough for me to hear, "It won't work." Then they piled back into the van and sped off. The 2 men still hadn't moved, not an inch. Their posture was unnatural. They almost looked like wax dummies. Something about this made me feel uncomfortable, so I locked the door. The station was silent except for the faint electrical buzz of old lights and the occasional rattle of the wind against the overhead sign. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for the moment my mum and sister would return. When they came out, they were running. That hit me. At full speed as well. They flung open the car doors and jumped in without another word. "Go!" my mum snapped. "Now!" I turned to the key, and that's when we all saw it. The 2 men turned to face us, their heads swiveled in sync, and their eyes weren't just black, but empty. Void. I slammed the gas and we tore out of there like a bat out of hell, none of us speaking until we hit the lights of the next city. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look and couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper maps we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station on that stretch of road and only got confused looks. We traveled on that interstate since, and there's no rest stop or gas station. This happened in the early 90s, during a long road trip to Virginia. It was near midnight and we'd been driving for hours. Everyone was tired. My mum mentioned she needed to use the bathroom, so my dad pulled onto a near-empty rest stop off the interstate. He dropped her off right in front of the building while the rest of us stayed in the car. Seeing as my mum was a few minutes, I decided to stretch my legs and follow her in. The place was dimly lit and eerily quiet. I stepped through the main entrance, but something felt off, and that's when I saw him. A massive man, well over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered with a long dark coat, was carrying my mother over his shoulder like a rag doll. Her arms hung limp, her body frozen, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, not screaming, Just pure shock and terror. He was heading for this side exit, calm as whatever, like it was just a normal part of his day. I stood frozen for a split second trying to process what I was seeing, and then I screamed and panicked. The scream must have echoed through the building because in that exact moment my dad was walking through the front door. He saw the man and ran for him. The guy didn't say a word. He just set my mum down gently, turned around and walked straight out of the building and into the night. My mum collapsed on the floor trembling. We called the police and waited in the car, all of us in shock. She told us what happened. When she entered the women's restroom, the lights were off. She thought maybe they were motion sensor lights that hadn't triggered yet. But as she stepped in, someone grabbed her from behind. She said she didn't even have time to scream before he covered her mouth and lifted her off the ground and didn't say a word. She didn't know where he was taking her or what he planned to do. He must have heard us come in, or maybe he didn't expect a child to follow her so soon. The police showed up 20 minutes later. My parents went to the station the next morning so my mum could go through mugshots but couldn't recognize anyone, and no one was ever caught. After that, my family had a new rule. No one ever goes into a rest stop bathroom alone, not even in daylight. This happened to me about 3 years ago. I was a few months pregnant at the time. My belly was visible and still fitted in shirts, but flowy shirts, and you couldn't tell. This is relevant to the story. I had taken my car into the dealership to have a recall fixed, and the dealership gave me a rental vehicle. In order to not be charged an extra fee, I needed to bring back the vehicle with a full tank of gas. So I had stopped at the gas station that's directly across the street from the dealership to fill up. I parked at the farthest pump because it was the closest to the exit that would lead to the dealership. I was the only person filling up on that side of the station. I was standing next to the car and pump, waiting for the tank to fill, when a man in a large truck drove up to the opposite side of the pump. He piled up far enough that his truck was blocking all the other people on the other side of the gas station, but not far enough that he would be able to pump gas. He rolled down his window and asked me where the store was. I pointed in the direction and told him which way to go, and he continued saying, "I'm not from around here, can you show me on a map?" and held up his phone. At that point I started to feel something wasn't right. Why would he need to ask for directions if he had a smartphone with GPS? Why couldn't he just look it up? So I continued telling him what direction he needed to be heading and where to turn. At this point, he almost got a little agitated or annoyed in his tone. He said to me, "Nah, come over here and show me." I said something like, "No, because it's just down the street." He told me again and again to go over to him and I declined. Then he started threatening, "Come here now or I'll go over there." When he said that, I could hear the aggression in his tone. I got scared and instinctively grabbed my belly and said, "No." He then realized I was pregnant and suddenly just sped off. I don't know what his intentions were, but I feel in my gut that it was malevolent. The fact that I was pregnant might have saved me from whatever he had planned. And to this day I still get nervous when I have to get gas, and I always make sure that I'm near others. This happened a few years ago. I went to pick up my baby sister from the Circle K where she worked the night shift. When I pulled into the lot, my stomach dropped. There were flashing lights everywhere. Cop cars, an ambulance just pulling away. That's when I found out my sister had been brutally attacked and robbed. I rushed to the ER. She was already in a hospital bed when I got there, wrapped in a blanket up to her nose. The first thing she said over and over was, "Don't freak out, I'm okay." She wasn't. She had 2 black eyes, a split lip, a broken elbow, a broken nose, and was trying so hard to stay strong and calm us down. I swear she took it like a champ. The security footage was hard to watch. She had stepped out of the walk-in freezer to greet the customer, just doing her job, and he hit her so hard in the face she flew backwards into the freezer and hit the door. But he didn't stop there. He stood over her and kept punching and kicking. She's barely 100 pounds, but you can see her fighting back in the video, kicking, swinging, and trying to defend herself while flat on the ground. all of this, over $60 in the register. Later, still bruised and stitched up, she was angrier about that than anything else. If I'm going to get beat up like that, he could have at least taken the $400 under the register. I'd already pulled the drop and stuck it into the folder. Demas didn't even grab it. And then she laughed, and that made me want to cry. But here's where it gets stranger. They caught the guy, and he was covered in blood, not far from the store. It was everywhere on him. When they tested it for the trial, it wasn't his, and it wasn't my sister's either. To this day, no one knows whose blood was on him. When I was 17, I worked the night shift alone at a gas station. One night, this guy comes in at around 11 p.m. It was cold outside, and he was wearing just shorts, a jacket, and no shirt. He was also slightly limping and barefoot. He wanders the aisles, muttering to himself. Nothing I could make out, just low and erratic, and eventually he grabbed a coffee, came up to the counter, and stared at me for a few seconds, then said, "Tell Pam I say hello." Then he just walked out. An hour later, Pam, a regular, came in. Super friendly lady, always chatted a bit when she came through. As I was ringing her up, I said, "Hey, some guy came in earlier and told me to tell you hi." She blinked and asked who. So I tried describing him. Barefoot, limping, no shirt, muttering to himself, kind of out of it. As I kept going, I could see her face visibly drain of color. I asked her if she was all right, and she nodded and slowly pulled out her phone and called her husband. "Lock the doors and call the cops. I'll be home in 3. And then she left fast. I never found out what it was about, but I never saw the man again, and Pam never brought it up afterwards. But it still gives me chills just thinking about it. I was working the late shift at a well-known chain gas station when a guy walked in and made a beeline for the counter, carrying 4 of the largest alcoholic beverages we sold. From the moment he stepped inside, I could tell he was already hammered. Glassy eyes, swaying slightly, slurring his words just enough to raise every red flag in my head. Trying to gauge the situation, I made small talk with him while ringing up his purchase, hoping to hear that he lived nearby and was just planning to stumble home. But no such luck. With complete confidence and zero self-awareness, he mentioned he was on his way to his destination, at least 3 hours away. And I remember thinking, "Oh no, you're not." The moment he walked out, I grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency police line, reporting him as a potential drunk driver. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I knew I just couldn't let it slide. Not 5 minutes later, officers pulled him over, and sure enough, he blew over 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested on the spot. When his court date rolled around, I decided to show up. I wasn't sure what to expect, but in the end he took a plea deal, and the judge didn't go easy on him. They threw the book at him. It was nerve-wracking because I had never done anything like that before, never actively intervened in a situation like this. But I knew I had to make the call. And you know what, I don't regret it for a second. For all that I know, that decision could have maybe not only saved his life, but the lives of innocent people on the road that night. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was a few months pregnant. Not quite showing in every outfit yet, my belly was obvious in fitted shirts, but in looser ones it was hard to tell. And this detail ends up being important later. I had dropped my car off at the dealership to get a recall fixed. They gave me a rental in the meantime, standard stuff. So when I went to return the car, I needed to fill up the tank first, otherwise I'd get hit with a fee. So I stopped at the gas station right across the street from the dealership. It's a big lot, so I parked at the furthest pump, the one closest to the exit, so I could just zip right back across the road when I was done. It was broad daylight and I was the only person on that side of the station, and I was standing outside the car waiting for the tank to fill, when a large pickup truck pulls up to the opposite side of the pump. He wasn't close enough to actually pump gas, just angled in a way that blocked my view of everyone else at the station. The driver rolled down his window and called out to me. "Hey, do you know where Jimmy's is?" That was the name of the store, I think. I pointed him down the street and told him which way to go. I figured maybe he was from out of town. But then he held up his phone. I'm not from here. Can you show me on the map? I could tell something was off. Why was he asking for a direction if he had a smartphone? Why not just type it in? It didn't make sense. So I tried to brush it off. I just repeated what I'd said and pointed again. That's when his tone shifted, slightly sharper and more forceful. Nah, come over here and show me. I hesitated. You don't need me to do that. It's just down the street. Then came the command again, firmer this time. Come here now. When I didn't move, he added, or I'll come over there. That's when everything inside me started screaming danger. My stomach turned. I felt this cold wave of fear ripple through me, and without thinking I instinctively put a protective hand over my belly. His eyes dropped, and for the first time he noticed I was pregnant. And just like that he peeled out and sped off without another word. He wasn't lost or needed directions and didn't want help. Whatever he had planned or was about to do, me being pregnant changed his mind. I stood there heart pounding, the pump clicking off behind me. To this day I still get uneasy every time I stop for gas alone, and I always choose to pump closest to other people and stay alert. And I'll never forget the way his voice sounded when he said, or I'll come over there. This all happened the summer after I graduated high school. I had just started working at a small gas station in my hometown, and I was excited for the independence that came with having a job. But I had no idea that a regular customer would soon make going to work absolute hell. There was this guy who used to come in with his girlfriend. They were regulars, and he never gave me weird vibes until one day he came alone. I happened to be dressed up that day because I had a date right after my shift. Got a big date or something? He said. I replied that I was going out with a foreign exchange student I had been seeing. He was leaving in 2 weeks, so we were trying to spend as much time together as we could. Without skipping a beat, the guy says, well, me and my girlfriend broke up, so when the foreigner leaves, you should give me a shot. I kind of laughed it off in shock and reminded him again that I was seeing someone. I didn't think it would go beyond that at that moment, but I was so wrong. Turns out the guy had taken a serious interest in me. He started showing up only when I was working. My co-workers even commented on how he never came in otherwise. Every time it was the same routine, flirting, asking me out, commenting on how I looked that day. We made pizzas at this place too, and sometimes he'd order one just to stand there and talk to me the whole time I was making it. Once I forgot a topping on his order and he smirked and said, since you messed up, you owe me a date. I responded no, but you can get a discount, and walked away. Things escalated from annoying to disturbing. On the 4th of July, he offered to buy me alcohol if I went to a party at his place. I was 18, and yes, he wanted me to pick it out while I was working from the very store I worked at. That screamed date rape vibes, and I noped out of that conversation real fast. Then it got even creepier. One day, a man came in and asked, "Hey, are you Felicity?" When I said yes, he said, "My nephew won't stop talking about you. He's definitely got a thing for you." I felt sick. The guy was talking about me to his family. We had never had any interaction outside of me handing him receipts and a pizza slice. It all came to a head on my birthday. I was scheduled to work, so I volunteered to do the stockroom instead of the register. I didn't want to deal with people. After my manager and one dumb co-worker wished me a happy birthday, I went to the cooler to stock drinks. A few minutes later, the employee-only door swung open. I turned around expecting to see my co-worker, but it wasn't them. It was him. He looked weirdly excited and said, "Happy birthday, I have something for you." I was stunned and managed to stammer out, "Why do you think it's okay to come back here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my wrist and dropped something in my hand. It was a small baggie of weed. I was shaking, my mind was racing. How did he know it was my birthday? What if he had done something worse? What if my manager walked in while I was holding this? I rushed out and immediately told my manager what happened. The owner of the store was furious, but thankfully not with me. He told me I had full control of the situation, and if I saw him again I could either call the owner to kick him out or do it myself. I chose to do it myself. Next time he came in I snapped. I told him off, told him that stalking me at work for months was disgusting, especially since I couldn't really defend myself or be rude to customers. I told him it was never going to happen, and that he made me feel unsafe. I called him out for cornering me in the cooler, an employee-only space, and giving me illegal drugs that could have gotten me fired or arrested, and I told him to get the hell out and never return. It felt amazing. Most women don't get the chance to tell a creeper to their face, at work no less, and actually have their boss back them up. Thankfully, he didn't return, and I hope to never see him again. In 2016, I was 26. I worked a seasonal job in a warehouse about half-hour from my flat. One day after work, I ordered Thai takeout from my place maybe 10 blocks from home. There was a gas station next door, so I filled up and left my car at the pumps to say hi to some friends who lived across the street. I waited for my food to be ready, maybe 15 minutes of chatting. Walked back across the street, grabbed my food, went across the lot to the gas station and into my car, and a 2-minute drive to my flat. At the time I lived in a duplex flat, with a gutted adjacent flat attached. Behind me was an old vacant motel that was currently being gutted and repurposed into a studio apartment complex. The nearest building to the left was an old clamper bar leading to the main street and the highway, and to the right was an empty lot where a building that was demolished nearly a decade ago once stood. The rest of the neighborhood was lower-income Hispanic. I pulled into my drive and noticed a car driving relatively slow past. I went inside and leashed my dog up to let her out. As I was standing in the yard waiting for the dog to do her business, a maroon Subaru Forester drove by slowly multiple times before pulling into my drive. I assumed he was lost or looking for something, and walked up to him as he got out of the car and approached me. He looked like any old white male in his 50s, and he kind of reminded me of my dad. I asked him if he needed anything and he replied, "Nah, I was just checking on you." I asked if I knew him, maybe figuring I didn't recognize him, and he said, "I saw you up by the gas. Seemed like you needed help. I'm just seeing if you need anything." I'm usually pretty slow to the cut, but at this point I'd pieced together the man had followed me from the gas station to a friend's house to a restaurant and then home. It didn't sit right. He was just standing there. He wasn't leaving, and I had time to process the situation. I thought maybe he's an older guy, I'm a younger girl. He's on this side of town in a nice car for whatever reason. Maybe he thinks I'm a trick. And I said again, "I'm sorry, I'm not really picking up what you're putting down. Why are you here?" "Nothing. Just a nice guy checking to see if you're alright." I specifically remember him calling himself a nice guy. During the period of this conversation, I had made it to my stoop, and he had closed the gap. Behind the door was me, the dog, and then him in his car. I told him, "You should leave," to which he replied, "Do you wish you had a nicer place?" And if my dog, a medium-sized German Shepherd, was friendly, and reached out towards her for a pet. I yanked her behind me and said, "No," pretty aggressively, and said, "Dude, leave." He finally started backing away, and I stood in the drive until he got into his car and drove off. I took down his license plate and car description, then I went inside. 15 minutes later, he pulled back into my drive and sat there for a good second and drove off. That's when I decided to file a police report. It didn't sit right. I just figured it was nothing. But I lived alone, and if anything happened, I wanted a record. It was 6 or 7 p.m. at this point, so the non-emergency line was closed. I filled out a report online and never heard back from the cops. Never saw the man or his maroon Forester again either. Might have just been a weird old man. And I never saw any reports of anyone going missing in Nevada in 2016 either. I know it's a stretch, but probably has nothing to do with anything. But I only just thought of this again in the last few months. They caught that guy in New York, and I wonder if he was in Nevada before it ever came out. Same age, same build, but I don't exactly remember the face from 7 years ago perfectly. Anyway, it makes you think. I used to work the night shift at a gas station. Big chain, rhymes with freeway. One night just before midnight, a guy walked in and grabbed 4 of our largest cans of high-proof beer that we had in the cooler. He was already swaying a little when he got to the counter, slurring just enough for me to catch it. I tried to make small talk, hoping he lived nearby. Maybe he was just walking home to drink himself to sleep. But then he mentioned casually that he was heading somewhere 3 hours away. I froze for a second. 3 hours away behind the wheel with more booze. I rang him up, smiled, and watched him stumble out to his car. As soon as he was out of sight, I stepped in the back and called the non-emergency police line, gave them the make, model, plate, direction, everything. They pulled him over down the road. He blew over 3 times the legal limit. Later, I was subpoenaed to show up in court. The guy took a plea deal. He knew he had no shot. They threw the book at him, DUI, suspended license, the works. It was nerve-wracking. I'd never reported anyone before, and part of me was scared I'd overstepped. But I kept thinking, what if he had killed someone? What if I just stood there and let him go? And I'm not sorry for a second. I probably saved his life that night, and maybe someone else's too. The year was 2019. I was 52 at the time and heading out of town for a temporary job assignment. Nothing unusual. It was just me, my car, and a long stretch of Texas highway ahead of me. I stopped at a Buc-ee's. If you've ever been to one, you know the scene. Bright lights, oversized bathrooms, and lots of beef jerky. It was packed as usual. I figured I'd fill up the tank, stretch my legs, grab a snack, and hit the road. I had just finished pumping gas when a woman approached me. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, and it was immediately clear that she had some kind of developmental disability. She was distressed, on the edge of tears, and told me her ride had abandoned her while she was in the bathroom. She didn't have a phone and didn't know anyone's number. I walked her inside and spoke to the employees. They confirmed she'd been hanging around for nearly an hour asking people for a ride. Her story checked out, at least on the surface anyway. I don't normally do this. I mean, I never do this. But something in me couldn't walk away. I wasn't heading to her town, but I was passing close. I told her I could drop her off at the grocery store in the next town over. It was always busy, public, and close enough that she might find someone else to help her. Or worst case, walk the rest of the way. 5 miles beats 25. She agreed. I helped her into the passenger seat and we took off. That's when I noticed the van. It had pulled out of the gas station right behind us and was keeping pace with my car. No matter what lane I changed into or how fast I went or how many turns I made. It didn't tailgate, but it never left me out of its sight either. It was obviously deliberate. And something about the woman changed. She asked if she could play with my phone, reached for it even, and I told her no, that was for work, and moved it out of her reach. She pouted but then quickly pivoted and said she remembered her boyfriend's number and wished to call him. Now this was before I had voice command or Bluetooth. I was driving through the edge of a business district with no cell phone use while driving signs posted everywhere. I told her we'd call from the grocery store parking lot in a few minutes. That's when she snapped and turned hostile. "No, you have to take me home." I reminded her I wasn't heading that way and that I told her from the start I could only get her part of the way there. She began yelling, arguing with me, getting visibly more agitated, and the van got closer. I finally pulled into the grocery store parking lot. It was 4 p.m. and broad daylight, people everywhere. I stopped near the entrance where I'd be visible. "Give me your boyfriend's number then, I'll call him." She looked at me and sneered. "You're crazy. I don't have a boyfriend." She then pointed. "Oh look, there are my friends now." It was the van pulling into the lot. My stomach dropped. I rolled down the window and flagged down a nearby sheriff's deputy parked across the aisle. He walked over casually, but the moment I spoke his posture changed. I told him quietly about the woman, the van, and that I couldn't get her out of my car. He looked at her, then at the van, then back at me. "She brought you to where you want to go. It's time to get out." She did slowly, but not before smirking at me and saying, "You're paranoid." Then she added, "Thanks for the ride," and walked towards the van. The deputy turned to me and said, "Give me your contact info. I'll hold them up for 20 minutes while I check their plates and give them a lecture about abandoning a vulnerable adult. Get out of there, and don't pick up any more hitchhikers." I left shaking. Later that evening, the deputy called me to make sure I'd made it safely to my destination. He told me they were keeping an eye on the van, and that he had contacted law enforcement in the next county to follow up with me. Over the next week, I spoke with 2 deputies and a detective. They asked a lot of questions about her, the van, and how she approached me. But they never told me what they found. But sometimes I think about that. The strange way her demeanor shifted, the way it's felt like she was following a script, the sudden recollection of a non-existent boyfriend, the van, it all felt very wrong. And honestly, I was afraid that I would end up on some true crime show or the local news. Anyway, it was a near miss. Maybe I was a target that got away, but I'll never know for sure. All I know is I won't be picking anyone else up off the side of the road. I used to be a shift manager at a gas station. I'm a woman in my 20s, barely 5 feet tall, and I work the overnight shift. So naturally I attract all kinds of weird and creepy guys. One night at around 2 a.m, this man comes in. I've never seen him before. I ask how he's doing, just being polite, and he launches into a whole story about how a fight he had with his girlfriend. I'm customer service 24/7, so I just nod along, give him some generic advice, and eventually he leaves. I don't think much of it, happens all the time. But over the next 3 nights, he kept coming back, not buying anything, not to get gas, just to talk. And he refuses to leave without a full-on conversation with me, like at least 15 plus minutes each time. It made me quite uncomfortable, especially since I had a lot of work to do during the night shift. We're talking trash runs, stocking coolers, inventory, etc., and this dude was just loitering. On the 4th night, I'm outside changing trash bags at the pumps. It's quiet, at around 3 a.m, and of course here comes the guy again. He immediately tries to start up another chat. I play it cool, but when I move to the next trash can, he follows up, step for step. No space and no sense of personal boundaries. Then he asks me to come and look at something in his car. At that point, I'm trying to stay calm while scanning for my cashier inside. Luckily, we had already talked about this guy and had a code system for uncomfortable situations. I make eye contact with her and give her the look. She gets out instantly, walks out and says, "Hey, I need your help with something inside." I thank the guy, go inside, and thankfully he doesn't follow me. The next night he doesn't show up at all. I'm relieved, but as I'm handing off the shift at 6 a.m, the next manager tells me there's a phone call for me, which is weird, because I'm not the only manager there. Whoever called asked for me by name. I answer the phone. "Thank you for calling, Greggs. This is Cynthia. How may I help you?" "I've been a regular customer for a while, and I was wondering if I could go down on you for 500 straight." "What?" The guy calmly repeats the offer, and I just hung up. Still in shock, I turn to my co-worker, another manager, middle-aged dude, and tell him what happened. He replies, 500? You can get way more than that." Needless to say, I no longer work there. I was driving through the Midwest, going up to visit Mount Rushmore. I was taking minor highways most of the way because I enjoy scenic drives, but I started running low on gas in western Nebraska. I drove with my gas light on for another 20 miles, by nothing but empty fields when I finally see a sign for a town called Palisade. I turn in and see probably the most podunk town I've ever seen, and I live in the country. Seriously, there was not a single car on the road, and only a couple of parked around randomly. I pulled into a small, single-pump gas station and noticed that there was no credit card input for the pump. No big deal, I thought, so I turned and tried to go into the small service shack that was by it, but the door was locked and the lights were out. I looked through the window, and the shack was completely empty, like it had been abandoned. I got in my car to try my luck going to the next town, but my wife told me she needed to use the restroom. So I drove down Main Street past boarded out windows and empty stores and parked at the local post office. which was closed. It was 30 minutes too late. So I started to tell her there was absolutely nothing open in this town when I saw a door that consisted of plywood instead of glass on a shop that had a busted window open and a couple of people walk out carrying a bag. So we walked over, while being stared at the whole time by the people who came out, and pulled open the plywood door and entered a narrow, extremely dark and dirty, disorganized, practically unstocked country store which employed a single worker at the front, a big burly guy wearing a greasy set of overalls and a trucker hat. It's a little hard to describe, but he seriously looked like straight out of a horror movie. I asked the guy behind the counter if there was a restroom that we could use, but he either had trouble hearing or trouble understanding, so I repeated myself slower and louder, twice. Finally he understood, and told me in the thickest country accent possible that it was in the back. Then repeated himself, giving me extremely detailed directions on how to get to it when I could practically see it from where I was standing. He then repeated himself a third time, going into excruciating detail on the perils I might face on going to the bathroom, such as low toilet paper or boxes in the way. Finally, I thanked him and walked to the back, and sure enough, there were dirty, dusty boxes of empty cleaning supplies thrown everywhere that we had to step around before going to the door. I opened it, and the sight made a truck stop bathroom look like a palace. Luckily, my wife did not notice half a dozen roaches scurry off, probably because the whole place was so dark, but she did notice the mold on the walls, the puddle of an unknown substance on the floor, and the 50 or so empty rolls of toilet paper thrown around. I asked her if she was okay, and she hesitantly told me that she would be fine, and that she really had to go. I started walking around the store while being stared at by the guy. I grabbed a water bottle to buy. I always buy something when I use the restroom, and when my wife finally came out, I went to the front to pay. He asked if we found the bathroom okay. As we walked out, there were a few people across the street having a conversation, but immediately stopped and stared at us, so I ignored them as best I could, got in the car and started driving off. But I noticed a car parked at one gas pump station as I passed it, fueling. I didn't care though. I got out of that town before it went full Twilight Zone, and was able to make it to the next town before I ran out completely. In 2016, I was 26, and I worked a seasonal job in a warehouse about a half-hour away from my domicile. One day after work, I ordered a Thai takeout from a place maybe 10 blocks from home. There was a gas station next door, so I filled up and left my car at the pump to say hi to some friends who lived across the street while I waited for my food to be ready. After 15 minutes of chatting and walking back across the street, I grabbed my food, across the lot to the gas station and into my car, and a 2-minute drive to my flat. At the time, I lived in a duplex flat with a gutted adjacent flat attached. Behind me was an old Vincent motel that was currently being gutted and repurposed into studio apartments. The nearest building to the left was an old clamper bar leading to the main street and the highway, and the rest was an empty lot where a building that was demolished nearly a decade earlier once stood. The rest of the neighborhood was low-income Hispanic. I pulled into my drive, noticed a car driving relatively slow past. I went inside and leashed up my dog to let her out. As I was standing in the yard waiting for the dog to do her business, a maroon Subaru Forester drove by slowly multiple times before pulling into my drive. I assumed he was lost or looking for something, and walked up to him as he got out of the car and approached me. He looked like any older white guy in his 50s. He kind of reminded me of my dad. I asked him if he needed anything, and he replied, "No, I was just checking on you." I asked him if I knew him, figuring maybe I didn't recognize him, and he said, "I saw you up by the gas. You seemed like you needed help. I'm just seeing if you need anything." I'm usually pretty slow to the cut, but at this point I'd pieced together that this man had followed me from the gas station to a friend's house to a restaurant and then come home. It immediately didn't sit right. He was just standing there and wasn't leaving, and I had time to process the situation. I thought maybe he's an older guy, I'm a younger girl, he's on this side of town in a nice car for whatever reason, and maybe he thinks I'm a trick. And I said again, No, I'm sorry, I'm not picking up what you're putting down. Why are you here? Nothing. I'm just a nice guy checking to see if you're alright. I specifically remember him calling himself a nice guy. During this period of conversation, I had made it to my stoop, and he had closed the gap. Behind was the door, then me, the dog, then him in his car. I told him, "You should leave," to which he replied, "Do you wish you had a nicer place?" And if my dog, a medium-sized German Shepherd, was friendly and reached out towards her for a pet, I yanked her behind me and said, "No," and pretty aggressively told him to leave. He finally started backing away, and I stood in the drive until he got into his vehicle and drove off. I took down his license plate and car description and then went inside. 15 minutes later, he pulled back into my drive and sat there for a moment and drove off again. That's when I decided to file a police report. It didn't sit right. I just figured it was nothing, but I lived alone, and if anything happened, I'd want a record. It was 6 or 7 p.m. at this point, so the non-emergency line was closed. I filled out a report online and never heard back from the police. I know it's a stretch and probably has nothing to do with anything, but I only just thought of this again in the last few months. They caught that guy in New York, and I wondered if he was in Nevada before it came out. Same age, same build, but how do you remember a face from 7 years ago? I just remember the man in my place having more salt and pepper hair. He treated me like he thought I was soliciting, and he wanted to help. No respect for my boundaries, just scary and off in every way. I guess I'll never know, but it really unsettled me. This happened when I was 20. I was pretty oblivious to dangerous situations and grew up pretty sheltered and knew to say no to drugs. One night I was at my friend's party, and a guy from a halfway across the street crashed it. I had no clue what halfway houses were. My friend thought he was a friend, and I thought he was her friend. The guy and I got along pretty well and ended up casually dating for a bit. He ended up being kicked out the halfway house and moved in with his friend. One day the friend asked if he could get a ride and I said sure, not knowing that bad things would come. He asked me to go to a check cashing store a mile away, which was fine. After we got there, we went to the gas station per his request, and when we got there, he got out of the car to speak to a guy in an old rusty truck. When he got back in the car, he asked me to follow the truck. At this point, I thought it was strange. We got to a fast food joint, and the friend left my car again. I asked the guy I was dating what the heck was going on, and he said, "Oh, he's just buying drugs. The truck guy's girlfriend will come into your car as collateral while he's going to get there." I should have said hell no and driven off, but I was an oblivious 20-year-old. A lady who looked like she was on crack got in the car and started telling us about her 5 kids. This whole time I wondered what the hell I'd just gotten myself into, and was now terrified of the friend, as he seemed to be getting angry and on edge. Thankfully, the guy came back, the lady left, and I drove them home. I got out of there very fast, and pretty much never saw either of the guys again. I mean, what do you do in this situation? A number of years ago, I was on a road trip. There were 2 cars, and it was our family divided between both vehicles. I was being a bit annoying in the car. I was 14 at the time, and really didn't like my dad's music. This was in the era before iPads and cars having screens and anything like that, or smartphones for that matter, so my only entertainment was either reading a Game Boy or looking out the window and trying to just think of stuff. I was pretty bored. My dad's music wasn't really vibing with me, and I asked if I could go into the other car, and he said fine. We pulled up to a gas station, and I was talking to my family in the other car. I told them I was just going to the toilet, but my big mistake was that I never told them I was going in their car. So, while I'm in the toilet, I come back out, and there are no cars. I realized now that my dad never told them I was going to go in their car, and my dad had assumed I'd just gotten in their car, and they'd both driven off. Both of them wouldn't know that I wasn't in either car for about another 3 hours, as the place we were going to was at least 200 kilometers away on very windy mountainous roads. I was in a bad situation. This gas station was in the middle of nowhere. Sparse vegetation surrounded us in the deserted area, and it was just me and a cashier behind the register. I didn't really know what to do. I went to her and asked her for some advice, and she just shrugged and said I should wait here and they'll eventually figure out, and that I could sit on the floor. How kind. She was only a few years older than me, so I thought she could have been a bit more empathetic. But there you go. I sat there waiting for about 20 minutes when a guy pulls up with a big belly wearing a checkered shirt and a long beard. He looked like your stereotypical trucker, and he was driving a pickup. He came in, he looked about middle-aged and was flirting with the young cashier who wasn't having any of it. That should have been my first red flag. This guy was a bit of a creep. But I was desperate and thought to myself, maybe someone can give me a lift. Hey, I might even be able to beat them to where I'm going. The guy then looks at me and says, "What are you doing down there on the floor?" He offers me his hand, and I graciously accept it and stand up. Remember, I'm quite young, telling him how I'm stranded here and my destination was 3 hours away and my family left me and I didn't know what to do. He told me he was going that way anyway, which was believable as I'd seen his vehicle pull up from the opposite direction to show he was going in the same way we were, and there was only 2 directions you could go in anyway. This road was quite long, and this place we were going was pretty much the only stop on the way, so it was convincing to me as I'd done this trip many times before. I hesitantly agreed, and I asked him, "You're not a creep, are you?" He laughed, a big belly laugh, and told me that I would be fine, and I hopped in the passenger seat of his truck. The moment the door opened, I was hit by a wave of the foulest miasma. I don't know what this guy had done in there, but it reeked profoundly. It's like the place had never been cleaned, and judging by the detritus all over the carpet of the truck, it was evident that it never had been cleaned. It was littered with wrappers, bottles, cans, and unknown dark substances on the corners that I'm sure weren't mud. I felt quite repulsed, but I had no other option. I jumped in the passenger seat and we started making our way. He was driving quite quick, which pleased me greatly. I wanted to be out of this vehicle as quickly as possible and reach my family too. As we were driving, he starts asking me questions. My naivety got the better of me. I told him where I lived, where I went to school, how old I was, that I didn't have a boyfriend, and when he asked me if I was a virgin, I clammed up. Obviously, it's not a question a grown-up asks with good intentions, and the fact that I was only made me more nervous, like I should have lied. I hesitated, and he told me it was alright and that I didn't need to answer, and he apologized for asking. The car went silent for a few minutes, me not knowing what to say, but being the passenger feeling somehow obligated to start conversation. I just didn't know what to do though, or what to say, and I sat there dumbfounded for the longest time. After a few more minutes of silence, I see a dirt road off in the distance. He starts slowing down his truck and putting on his blinkers. I ask him where he's going, and he says he just needs to pick something up from home first. That's when I get knots in my stomach. I start feeling extremely uncomfortable. We pull up at this house, what he claims to be his home. I guess it looks just as filthy on the outside, and I wait. He's gone about 5 minutes, and I start to get really uncomfortable. I'm really hot. He took the keys out and the AC was off, and I was starting to sweat. So I jumped down out the truck and slowly approach his porch. I was going to tentatively open the door and ask him how long he'll be, because I was starting to get hot. When I open the door and look inside, I am met with another equally powerful stench, but this one is far more pronounced. It smelt like something died in there. I hear him shuffling upstairs and slowly open the door a bit more. I look around nervously and tentatively say, I'm a bit hot in the truck." I can hear him rummaging upstairs for something, and he doesn't hear me. That's when I hear him finally stop rummaging and start running down the stairs. As he starts running down, something inside me told me to hide. I quickly just move myself to the side of a wall, and he runs straight past me without noticing and out the door, holding this huge machete. When I saw it, I just about crapped my pants. Obviously, some guy coming out of his house with a huge machete doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. I panic. He notices straight away I'm not in his truck and starts shouting angrily, demanding to know where I am and if I'm in his house. Panic really sets in. I look behind me and see a bathroom. The bathroom has one of those sliding doors to lead outside, and I quickly and as quietly as possible slide the door open and shut and start making my way out of the house. I look around, and as I mentioned before, it's a desert. There's nowhere to hide unless I start burying myself. The road we drove in to get here was at least 200 meters long, and if he jumps in the truck, there's no way he won't reach me. But with no other choice, I decide I have to run. I'm not athletically built, but I'm not exactly chubby either. So I start running as quick as I can. It's not before long that I hear a hey in the distance, and he starts running for his truck and switching it on. I run as fast as my legs can carry me, and I'm not entirely sure how I beat a truck to the road from the dirt road. But once I'm on the main road, he starts thrashing towards me in his truck, screaming at me. I start walking when I reach the end as if I've reached some kind of safe haven, but once he gets on the road itself, he pulls up right next to me and demands that I get in, telling me I'm not safe. I'm telling him I'll be fine and that I don't want to ride anymore. He starts yelling at me that I'm an ungrateful so-and-so and that I'm such a tease and a user. I really didn't know what to say in regards to that. I felt sickened. That's when another car comes up from behind him. Obviously, there's just one road going one way and one the other, so the guy has to slow down and starts beeping at the truck. The guy in the truck looks back in annoyance and quickly does a U-turn in order to come follow me again. The guy in the other vehicle gives me eyes like, "Are you alright?" and I wave my arms up and down. He pulls over a bit further away from where I am, and I run over to his vehicle. He asks me what's wrong, and I tell him that guy's following me. I make another stupid decision and get in this stranger's car. But this guy was much older, in his mid-50s, and looked genuinely concerned for me. After talking to him for the next 3 minutes, he told me the safest thing to do would be to take me back to the gas station. So he flipped the car around and drove straight there. Thankfully, the creepy truck guy didn't follow, and once he dropped me off at the gas station and made his way, I was very, very scared that creepy truck guy would come back. 4 hours since I had been dropped off at the gas station or thereabouts, my parents came flying by and were crying, saying they were so concerned. They'd stopped somewhere for a toilet break, and when I didn't emerge from the other car, my parents got concerned and asked if I was hiding in the car still and if I didn't need to go to the restroom. They told me that I wasn't in their car, and then my parents panicked. The other car wasn't far behind, and from that day on, we made sure that if anyone was going to hop cars, the other people knew. I'm grateful to the guy who helped me, but always be wary when you're at a gas station. You never know if help is genuine or not. That's what I learnt anyway. Stay safe out there. Back when I used to make regular 5-hour weekend drives between Bristol and Newcastle, I had a routine. I'd always stop midway for food and fuel, usually at one of the large motorway service stations. It was a Friday evening and dark, and I pulled onto the southbound services for a quick bite to eat before finishing my journey. My old dog Rufus, my best travel companion, was curled up in the back seat as always. I locked the car, went upstairs to eat and didn't think twice. After dinner I came back down, and my car was gone. The space where it had been was empty. There was no broken glass though, But worse, Rufus was inside. I froze, my brain short-circuited. I looked around in disbelief, hoping I'd just misremembered where I parked. But after a few seconds of sheer panic and running around like a madman, I accepted it. Someone had stolen my car with my dog in it. Heart pounding, I called the police. Through shaky breaths, I tried to explain what happened. The emergency operator was calm and focused, and she asked me to take a deep breath and then asked one simple question. Are you absolutely sure you're on the correct side of the services? And that's when it hit me. In my post-meal autopilot, I must have accidentally walked down the stairs to the northbound side, the mirror image of where I had parked. I sprinted across the bridge to the other side, and there it was, exactly where I left it. Rufus in the backseat blinking at me with a dopey, "What's the fuss?" kind of face. I stood there in the parking lot and wept with relief. I called the police back and told them I was just a complete idiot. I never told Rufus what I thought had happened, but I did buy him a cheeseburger before we hit the road again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope this video was to your liking. If it was, you can leave the comments down below. And if you would like to support me and get some really cool perks, like the exclusive cemetery stories I've just released over on Patreon, feel free to check out the link in the description. I actually have a funny story with this video. It was supposed to be a Patreon/member-only video back in February. I'd recorded it, edited all the stories, but when it came to publishing it, I have no idea what happened. I was either too busy, too tired, or just forgot to do it. And so when I found in my document where I keep all the stories that these 5 had been recorded, but I had no evidence to show me where they had been recorded to, I looked like crazy until I found this folder. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So yeah, these stories might not have been published for years if I hadn't have decided to do this. Anyway, I hope that little anecdote was to your liking and this video, and hopefully I'll see you on Sunday for a chilling collection of compilations. I'm not entirely sure what the topic will be, if there even is one, but I hope to see you there nonetheless, and we should be back to our regular programming on Tuesday after that. But until next time, friends, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.